Hi, my name is Steve Kreklow. I'm the Germantown Village Administrator. Welcome to my presentation on the Village's 2024 recommended budget. During this presentation, I'll be providing background on the Village budget, explaining why we have a budget gap for 2024, describing how staff balanced the budget that was presented to the Village Board, talking about what other options the Village Board has available, and then describing the next steps in the budget review and adoption process. First, I'll provide some background on the structure of the village budget. While the village is responsible for collecting property taxes, the taxes you pay each year are distributed among 4 taxing jurisdictions. Approximately 53% of all property taxes go to the Germantown School District, 30% go to the Village of Germantown, 12% to Washington County, and 5% to the Milwaukee Area Technical College. The village budget is divided into multiple funds for accounting purposes. You may want to think about these as separate companies that are all aggregated into a single corporation. The fund that receives most of the attention during the budget process is the general fund. That's where the majority of property tax revenues go, and many of the services that people associate with the village are budgeted. For example, the fire department, police department, highway department, library, and rec programs are all funded through the general fund. The second fund that receives property tax revenue is the debt service fund. In the debt service fund, we budget for expected debt service payments that are coming up in the next year. The amount that we have to budget in this fund is determined by how much we borrow in previous years, and really at the point of the budget process is not really discretionary for staff or the village board. The third fund is a capital fund. This is where the village budgets for major capital projects. The largest component of the capital fund each year is typically the road reconstruction project, which generally gets about $1.5 million per year. In addition, you'll find other projects in the capital fund like replacement of major vehicles like fire engines or ambulances, DPW patrol trucks or police squad cruisers. You may also find projects for improvements to village parks like playground equipment or new shelters that are built. Recreational trails would all be budgeted there. Most of the projects in the capital fund are budgeted through the issuance of bonds and notes. So in other words, for projects in the capital fund, the village borrows for those each year. The next two funds I'll talk about are the sewer utility and the water utility fund. These funds are called enterprise funds in accounting terminology, and basically they're set up to run similar to businesses. The sewer and the water utility have to cover all of their expenses through the revenues that they collect, mostly through quarterly utility bills. There are generally no property tax levy dollars that go to the sewer utility or the water utility. They're expected to be completely self-sufficient enterprises. And then the final fund that I have listed on this slide is for tax increment districts. Tax increment districts are formed when the village seeking to take advantage of development opportunities will form a tax increment district in a certain location within the village. Once the tax increment district is formed, all additional incremental property taxes that are paid by properties within that tax increment district are used to fund debt service or provide cash for infrastructure projects like sewer or water or roads within the tax increment district, or in some cases, to provide development incentives to attract businesses into the tax increment districts. These funds are generally self-sufficient. They do not receive general property tax levy dollars from the village and are expected to cover their own costs. One of the important things to understand when reviewing the village budget is that typically funds cannot be moved between the funds. So in other words, if the village board during the budget adoption process decides not to purchase a new ambulance that was requested under the capital fund. While that does reduce the amount of borrowing that the village would have to do in further years, it would not make additional funding available to add, for example, firefighters in the general fund. The capital fund is funded through debt. The general fund is funded through the property tax levy and other revenues. And typically, we're not allowed to move money back and forth between those funds. That does create some limitations on the choices that the village board has and that staff has in putting the annual budget together. This pie chart illustrates the sources of revenue for the general fund. As you can see in the green area within the pie chart, taxes represent the largest components of revenues for the general fund, approximately $12.2 million per year. Next, we have intergovernmental revenues, which are about $3.6 million per year. This includes state shared revenue as well as transportation aids and other types of grants from the state and federal government. Public charges for services are the next largest category at $2.5 million. And some of the larger charges for services from the village that go to the general fund include fees for rec programs, ambulance fees, and other services that the village provides to residents at a fee. The third largest category are license, permits, and fees. This is primarily building permits. When a new building is put up, they are required to pay permit fees to the village, as well as expansions or even things like replacements of water heaters. And those fees total approximately $1 million per year. We do have some smaller categories here of miscellaneous revenues at $230,000 per year and fines and penalties at approximately $165,000 per year. This slide is the first of two illustrating general fund expenses. In this view, we're seeing what the village spends money on in the general fund. And as you can see by looking at the green slice and the blue slice of the pie, salaries, wages, and benefits for village employees comprises about 2/3 of general fund expenses. This is going to pay the cost of police officers, firefighters, DPW workers, library, parks and rec, and other village employees. Most of the remaining third of village expenses goes towards operating supplies and expenses. Some of the big ticket items that you'll find in this category include our contract with Waste Management for garbage and recycling collection, salt that we purchase under a state contract to salt the roads during the winter, as well as contracts for services for building inspections that we purchase for inspecting new buildings that are going up, as well as additions and renovations to existing buildings, and then various other expenses, everything from books that are purchased by the library to supplies that the rec program purchases for their various recreational activities. And finally, you'll notice a small sliver at the top of the pie of $161,000 for capital items. And that's for bigger ticket items that are not eligible for bonding, but do get purchased periodically. This would include equipment that Public Works uses, as well as some improvements to park and rec facilities. This next view looks at the general fund expenses by department. And as you can see that the largest department is the police department with 31% of the total general fund budget at about $6 million. The largest expense within the police department is for salaries and wages for police officers and detectives and command staff. The second largest department is Department of Public Works, which is at $5.9 million, about 30% of the budget. And this is where we pay for maintenance of highways and roads within the village, snow plowing, pothole patching, crack filling, etc. Maintenance of village parks, including mowing, tree maintenance, maintenance of equipment within parks, and then maintenance of village buildings and grounds, including the library, the village hall, police and fire departments, and other village buildings. This would also include the solid waste and recycling contracts that I mentioned previously. The third largest department within the general fund is the fire department at about $3.2 million, or 16% of the general fund. Again, this is largely salaries and wages, but also does include equipment and maintenance of the vehicles and ambulances and other equipment that the fire department has to operate. We also have some significant expenses for the recreation program at $1.4 million, or 7% of the village budget. A large portion of this is covered by revenues from recreation fees, but there is a tax levy support of about 20 to 25% of that overall cost each year. The library is about 5% of the village budget at just a little under $1 million, and community development is 4% at $800,000. This also does include the contract for building inspection services that I mentioned in a previous slide, that is offset by revenues that are collected on those fees. And then finally, all of the other village departments, including the village clerk's office, which handles elections, licenses, etc., the finance department, the administration department, and other expenses amounts to 7% or $1.4 million of the total village budget. One of the questions that we've received as this year's budget has gotten out into the public is, why do we have a budget gap this year? What's going on that's making the 2024 budget so difficult? In the next few slides, we'll try to explore that question a bit. In short, we have a budget gap in 2024 because our expenses are increasing faster than our revenues. Unlike some other levels of government in the United States, we are required to have a balanced budget each year. Our expenses have to equal our revenue. So when we're experiencing a period of higher inflation where things like salaries for police and fire, benefit costs, and contracts for supplies, materials, and services are going up at a higher rate, 4, 5, 6%, than our revenues, like property tax, which is limited by state statute to net new construction, and then further limited by village board policy to net new construction without new construction that occurs within tax increment districts. We have to make difficult choices. And those choices are either to bring expenses back down through efficiencies or reductions in service, or increase revenues in ways other than the property tax. In the next few slides, we'll look at some of the things that factored into those equations as we put together the 2024 budget. Here I can describe some of the factors that are driving our expenses up at a rate higher than we've seen in recent years. First of all, our salaries are up a total of $667,000, or about 7.75%. The bulk of that is in the police and fire department. Police salaries are up by $315,000, or 8.9%, and that includes a $130,000 increase in overtime, as we've seen overtime going up due to some turnover within the department, as well as increased number of calls. In the fire department, we see that salaries are up by $226,000, or 16.2%, and that includes $60,000 in overtime, again, largely due to an increase in the call volume that they're responding to. In addition, employee benefits are up by $329,000, or about 10.5%. And this includes employee health care costs, which is up $117,000, as well as the village's contribution for employees in the Wisconsin retirement system. The state law requires that village employees who receive pension benefits, retirement benefits, be a part of the Wisconsin retirement system. That includes our public safety employees as well as our general village employees. And each year, the Wisconsin retirement system sets the contribution rate for public employees that are members of it. And this year, that contribution for the village is up by $159,000. There are also several other expenses that are up by a total of $203,000. That includes our recycling and solid waste contract with Waste Management, our salt contract where we purchase salt to use on the streets during the winter. We've seen our IT support and security costs going up as we've been working to make our IT systems more secure and less vulnerable to things like ransomware and hacking. And then we also do have an increase in election costs in 2024 because we have 4 elections, including a presidential primary and a presidential election in November that will increase the labor and supplies and material costs necessary to administer those elections. We were fortunate that we did see some revenue increases in the 2024 budget. State shared revenue is up by nearly $500,000 this year as a result of some state legislation that gives more of the sales tax money that the state collects back to municipalities for services. We're also seeing ambulance fees going up by $250,000 as a result of a new contract for collections, as well as improved collections as we come out of COVID and there's improved payment rates. State transportation aids are up by $50,000 and property taxes are up by $167,000 based on the board policy of increasing them for net new construction for new construction outside of tax increment districts. While this is a total that is a little bit under $1 million, it's still significantly less than the overall increases that we saw in expenses this year. So we did need all of these revenues to close the budget gap as we were able to in the budget recommended to the village board. Another question that we've received from residents who have been looking at our budget is how did we go about balancing the budget? And we'll provide the answer to that question in the next few slides. In order to balance the budget, we had to make reductions of a little over $1 million to departmental budget requests. And this did include some service reductions, which deserve some consideration and discussion by the village board and Germantown residents. They include public safety dispatch consolidation with Washington County, reduction into the seal coating and crack filling programs, a reduction in library hours, a reduction to rec program part-time salaries and program supplies, and then other departmental reduction. I'll get into a little bit more detail of those on the next few slides. Washington County has long had a dispatch center that handling 911 emergency calls. They currently handle all calls except for West Bend, Hartford, and Germantown. Hartford is actually in the process of transitioning to the county with a scheduled completion date of January. In addition, all cellular calls are currently routed through Washington County. So if you call 911 from a cell phone, the first person who's going to pick up that call is going to be a Washington County dispatcher who will then ask where you're calling from and transfer you to the appropriate dispatch center if you're in Germantown. Germantown also has a 24/7 dispatch function with 8 full-time positions and a cost of approximately $600,000 per year. One of the challenges that we have faced, especially coming out of COVID with a challenging job market, is attracting and retaining dispatchers. We have had several vacancies and turnover in the past 12 to 18 months, and the village board did increase the salaries for dispatchers during 2023 to try to make it easier to attract people into that position. The recommended budget does include a 3-phase transition to a county-wide dispatch solution. The first phase would be to implement multi-juris software by March 30th. Currently, both Germantown Dispatch and Washington County Dispatch use the same software system called ProPhoenix to operate their dispatch function. However, there are some inconsistencies in the data utilized in Germantown's ProPhoenix and the data utilized in Washington County ProPhoenix. So this first phase would be to reconcile those databases and make sure they're consistent between the two organizations. Then we would work on transitioning third shift dispatch to the to Washington County, and then following that over a period of time, transitioning first and second shift. Um, it's also important to note that the dispatchers do other functions in addition to answering the emergency phone calls. There is at time downtime in the dispatch office, and those dispatchers do perform other beneficial functions for the police department, such as filing reports, processing paperwork, and other administrative type functions. In order to make sure that the police department has adequate staffing to continue to perform those functions, the 2024 recommended budget also includes 4 new administrative assistant positions. So there's a reduction on a phased-in approach of 8 dispatchers and a creation on a phased-in approach of 4 administrative assistant positions. The overall net savings as a result of those changes is $300,000 per year. However, as I mentioned, we're phasing this change in over a 12-month period, so we don't realize the entire $300,000 savings initially. The county has offered and is budgeted to make a $150,000 contribution to the Village of Germantown in order to fill that gap and support dispatch during the transition. So the actual impact on the 2024 budget of consolidated dispatch is a savings of $300,000. In order to keep dispatch in Germantown, the village board would have to find $300,000 in other budget cuts or additional revenues. I'll try to summarize some of the advantages and disadvantages of public safety dispatch consolidation. Let me start with the disadvantages. I think it's fair to say that a local dispatch function, such as the Village of Germantown, is probably going to be a little bit more familiar with the community than a consolidated dispatch function that serves all of Washington County. In addition, there are times when a dispatcher is the only staff person that is on site in our police station during third shift. If we no longer have the dispatch function, there will be times when the Germantown Police Department does not have anyone physically in it during some third shifts and some weekends. And then finally, on occasion, outside law enforcement jurisdictions will bring in warrants that do need to be confirmed by Germantown staff. Those are at times currently confirmed by dispatchers, and without a dispatch function, there may be occasions where police officers would have to come back to the station to confirm those warrants. There are also some advantages to public safety dispatch consolidation. First of all, there are some pretty significant financial savings. As mentioned in a previous slide, the annual savings from consolidating dispatch to the operating budget, the general fund budget, would be about $300,000 per year. In addition to that, the state of Wisconsin, in order to try to encourage municipalities to move towards consolidation of functions like dispatch, are offering a grant program for 3 years. The village would be eligible to collect a total of $90,000 over the 3 years from that grant program. Third, there would be some cost avoidance when we're planning and eventually constructing a new police building. If we don't have a dispatch function, that would reduce the cost of a new police building in terms of the space and technology that would have to be constructed for that facility. And then finally, there are a series of grants that are available through the state and federal government, notably the Next Gen 911 program, that the village is not eligible for. The county, however, with a larger dispatch function, is eligible for those grant funds and is able to take advantage of those to upgrade technology. If the village keeps a dispatch function, we will have to at some point upgrade to the Next Gen 911 system, and we will not be eligible for grants to do that, and that will have to come out of either general obligation debt or property tax levy dollars. We also had to make a significant reduction to the seal coating and crack filling program in order to balance the budget. Historically, the village has budgeted about $350,000 per year for the village to seal coat roads and crack fill roads. These are programs that are set up not to try to renovate roads that need repair, but to try to extend the useful life of our roads. Um, the 2024 budget includes only $250,000 for seal coating and crack filling, which is a $100,000 reduction. This is a programmatic reduction where residents won't see an immediate impact, but over the long term, the reduction will reduce the useful life of roads and either result in in worse roads with more potholes and lower PASER ratings, or the village will have to, at some point in the future, invest more in the capital road replacement program and increase borrowing levels. The 2024 recommended budget also includes a reduction to the library budget. The library budget was reduced by about $100,000 in order to balance the budget. And the impact of that would be a decrease in operating hours from 59 to 52 per week, the elimination of one part-time staff position, a reduction in materials purchases. Those are things like CDs or books or other items that the library has available for loan, and a reduction to programming. Um, while this is a $100,000 reduction from the request, the village contribution to the library would be approximately the same as it was in 2023. As I mentioned in a previous slide, fees for programs cover about 70 to 75% of the cost of the rec programs that the village offers to village residents. However, there is a significant property tax levy subsidy for those programs. In order to balance the 2024 budget, that property tax levy subsidy for these programs was reduced by $100,000. As a result of that, the Park and Rec Department is going to have to make some adjustments to their programming. There will be a reduction to part-time salaries and program supplies that will result in the elimination of some programs that cover a lower percentage of their costs through fees. Fees from other programs will be increased to offset revenues from eliminated program and balance the Park and Rec budget. This slide lists other reductions that we made in order to balance the 2024 budget. And as you can see, there's a wide variety of changes that were made in order to balance the budget, and all village departments were affected. So far, we've talked mostly about what staff has done to put together a balanced recommended budget to give to the village board. At this point, the village board does have options available in order to make changes. They may wish to restore some of the service reductions that were included in the recommended budget. They may wish to reduce revenues for property taxes or other areas. And there are ways that they could do that. However, before we proceed to the next slides describing some of those options, I want to point out that whatever changes the board makes, ultimately they have to balance the budget. So if they do add costs to the budget, they have to also add revenues. Or if they decrease revenues for the budget, they have to also decrease costs. That's one of the challenges that they face as they look at making potential changes to what was recommended by staff. The village board could look at alternative or additional reductions to services. I've outlined a few of those on this slide. They could further reduce the seal coating and crack filling program. There is $250,000 in the recommended budget that could be reduced further. They could further reduce tax levy support for rec programs. They could further reduce library hours. Or as an alternative, they could reduce or eliminate the tree planting program that is budgeted in the Department of Public Works. That is budgeted at approximately $50,000 for tree planting each year. The village board also has some options for increasing revenue. There is $150,000 increase in property tax levy that is available to the board under state levy limit controls. That would have an impact of approximately $30 on a $300,000 home. They could also transfer up to $537,000 of the fire protection fee from the property tax levy to the utility bill. The fire protection fee is an amount that the village is required to budget each year to pay from the general fund to the water utility for the cost of maintaining fire pressure service in areas of the village that have fire hydrants. Currently, this is paid for out of property tax levy, but the village board does have the authority to shift that cost to the quarterly utility bill. And then finally, the village board does have the legal authority to create a wheel tax or a vehicle registration fee to fund road improvements. So, for example, here, the village could add somewhere in the range of $5 to $10 on Germantown residents' annual vehicle registration fees that they pay to the Department of Transportation, and that could be used to fund the crack filling and seal coating programs and even some of the road replacement programs. The final question that I'm going to address as part of this presentation is how the village might be able to fund additional public safety positions. The police department and fire department have completed studies and analysis that indicate that due to increased call volume for both police and fire services, the police department needs an additional 4 officers, and the fire department requires an additional 12 firefighters and paramedics. There are several options that the village board does have to work towards achieving the needed staffing levels. One would be to request all 16 new positions in an April 2024 referendum at a cost of $1.6 million. And that is a decision that the village board could make and put whether or not to fund those additional positions in the hands of Germantown voters. A second option that's available to them is to partially achieve staffing levels in the 2024 budget. And that is possible by adding 4 police officers, using an additional increase in transportation aids that we became aware of recently, as well as the $151,000 in increased property tax levy available and a reduction in tree planting. They could also add 2 firefighter paramedics by shifting half of the public fire protection fee to the quarterly utility bill. And then the village board could still go forward with a referendum, but only for 6 firefighter paramedics at a cost of $600,000. The village board will be spending many hours over the next weeks reviewing the 2024 budget and determining the best path for the village to take forward. This slide includes a schedule of all of the meetings, including committee of the whole meetings that discuss in detail departmental budgets, as well as additional budget presentation and Q&A sessions that cover the materials that were presented on these slides. Final budget adoption will take place on November 20th, and there will be an official public hearing where village residents can voice their opinions on that date. I really appreciate the fact that you took the time to listen to this presentation and learn more about the Germantown Village budget and some of the financial challenges that we're facing. If you do have any questions or would like any additional information, please email or call me as listed below on this slide, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Thank you very much for your time, and have a great day.